Some very big news out of the FCC. Let's throw this up there on the screen. Section 230, which is kind of the legal infrastructure that governs the entire internet, essentially says that large technology companies, places like YouTube, where most of you are watching this, but Twitter, Facebook, and others, are not responsible for most of the content on their platforms. Essentially, that user-generated content, they cannot be sued over that. Now, this has been very much come into dispute around their content moderation, because people are saying that if they unfairly bias their content moderation against one group over another, that it violates the spirit of the First Amendment and of the law, granted the major protection that they are granted.
Right. So the idea is they're not treated like publishers. They're treated like platforms. So it starts to get dicey once they begin doing things like what Facebook and Twitter and other companies started doing, of fact-checking, amending their little editing notes, completely barring you from even sharing the New York Post story about Hunter Biden. Those sorts of things begin to make you look more like a publisher making editorial decisions versus just a neutral platform.
Right, and largely what this is that the law itself, as people thought it was rock solid, but let's throw the FCC's tweet up there on the screen. Ajit Pai actually put out this statement yesterday. I want to explain this to people. So what he said is that he has been now advised by the General Counsel of the FCC that they can interpret Section 230, and that he has that capability. Now, they're not saying what they're going to do, but they actually hint very strongly down at the bottom about transparency by these social media companies. So essentially, they can't just ban you, as they did with the New York Post, which is that, and if I had to anticipate what's going to happen, is the FCC is going to force Google, Twitter, Facebook, and others in order to make public their content moderation standards. So as in, this is the standard for everybody. Because right now, we simply have no idea what happens and what not. And look, this could not be more relevant than ever. The last couple of days, they straight up invented a policy, banned a credentialed member of the White House press, the White House press organization, the New York Post. You can think whatever you want about the New York Post, but it is an editorial organization in the legal and broadest terms of the definition. Banned that Twitter account, banned the ability in order to go and look at these materials based on a BS standard of hacked materials, which, if applied fairly, would apply to Edward Snowden, the Pentagon Papers. I mean, some of the most important work
Trump
in
tax returns.
Journalism, the Trump tax returns.
They didn't seem to have any problem with that, sharing those stories.
And again, aren't we all better off for that? Are we not all better off for having seen the Trump's tax returns? Or any of this other stuff? I would rather know than not.
I do want to say, and we didn't say this yesterday explicitly, if they had just pinned it on, like, there were personal photos of Hunter Biden that were published in some of these stories that were, had zero news value, were just salacious, were just exploitative. If they had just narrowly said that that's the problem, I could maybe see more of a justification. But that wasn't their justification. It was this BS about, it's based on hacked materials. And I mean, really what it was is the moment that this story dropped, a lot of liberal journalists who are basically pro-Biden freaked out about it and put a lot of pressure on. And so Twitter came down with this over-the-top response. And of course, in the fraught final weeks of this election is the context here. And immediately, and this is what is so interesting, the Biden campaign used Twitter's response in order to say, nothing to see here. Let's take a listen to that.
What is your campaign response to this article, and do you think that Twitter is doing the right thing here?
Well, look, I think Twitter's response to the actual article itself makes clear that these, purported allegations are false and they're not true. And glad to see social media companies like Twitter taking responsibility to limit misinformation.
So look, the acquisition of these materials is sketchy. Rudy Giuliani is involved. The idea is that the laptop of Hunter Biden was left at a repair shop, and he never claimed it and becomes the property of the repair shop. One of the materials were sent to the FBI and then distributed to you. Okay, so that's what they said was happening. And actually, the Biden campaign hasn't really denied that happened.
Neither has Hunter. And look, I want to be clear. It's sketchy as hell. Rudy Giuliani is a sketchy guy, and the shop owner is a very sketchy dude, having watched some interviews with this guy. But that doesn't matter. If the emails are true, then they're true. Like, look, I mean, I covered WikiLeaks and a lot of that stuff. Roger Stone and Randy Credico and all these guys. Look, when you're dealing in the muck, this is the people that you have to deal with. But sometimes they have information, which is very important. And that's what I think is happening in this case. And look, it is not on Twitter to decide to just ban this stuff outright with a standard which, when applied fairly, like I said, this is what the FCC is getting at. If applied fairly, would be a dramatic threat to all of journalism. All of journalism.
Right.
And this is something that they realized, Krystal, last night, but not very highly publicized. They essentially reversed course, and we want to bring some of that to you. So let's put these tweets up there on the screen as you explain it.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So this is from Twitter's head of legal policy and trust and safety lead at Twitter. They posted this statement saying that over the last 24 hours is how she started. We've received significant feedback from critical to supportive about how we enforced our hacked materials policy yesterday. After reflecting on this feedback, we've decided to make changes to the policy and how we enforce it. She goes on to say in specific what the changes are. Number one, we will no longer, we have this tweet too we can put up here, we will no longer remove hacked content unless it is directly shared by hackers or those acting in concert with them. Pause on that one. Number two, we will label tweets to provide context instead of blocking links from being shared on Twitter. So you'll recall this New York Post story about Hunter Biden. They made it so that you could not even share the link. You couldn't DM it. And a lot of accounts, including people like Jake Sherman at Politico.
A reporter at a major outlet.
And Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, had their accounts shut down by Twitter because they shared some of these materials. I mean, it was this extreme response that they had that has only ever been applied to this one article. It's never been applied before. So clearly we saw after, so first that happens. Then Jack comes out, Dorsey, and says, we messed up, basically. But then the next day, they continued.
They blocked the next New York Post story.
The next New York Post story comes out. They continued with the same practice. And then at the end of the day, we get this statement released very sort of, in this very low-key way, where basically they say, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to remove hack content unless it is directly shared by hackers or those acting in concert with them. What seems like, do journalists count as acting in concert with them is one question that I have.
Once again, this is insane, and this is why none of this should happen, which is that, what does that define? Journalists, if you are doing an act of journalism, you are a journalist.
Right.
Even if it's not technically your profession. We have many citizen journalists who have broken some big stories here, and many of them try to get discredited by the mainstream media. So I am absolutely in favor of just erring on the side of caution and letting it all go down. And this was the thing that bothered me the most. Number one, and you know this, which is that this story wouldn't have even been that big if they hadn't.
It didn't really have anything new. It added some details to the story that we already knew.
Yeah, it just colors in the lines of some stuff that you already knew. You can look at Google search traffic. When after they banned it, boom, Streisand effect in full effect there. After they tried to ban it. But now it's a story about overreach. Look at the FCC. You think, look, I know these people, and I have followed in the big tech debate and many others. There are a lot of libertarians who work here in D.C. who for a long time who said, look, we shouldn't do it. It's better to err on the side of free speech. They're a private company. They can do whatever they want. This was a line. They crossed a line. You can't go back from that. Now we know the capability. They banned a credentialed news organization from their platform for no reason. And it is just as true as any other reporting out there. It's on us to suss out the facts. It's my job and your job in order to say, hey, this story doesn't have all the details. And you can decide for yourself. Right. That's the important part.
Well, I will say it is an improvement that they're saying they're not going to do the outright blocking of links. They're
going to label it.
They're going to label it, which we've seen in the past, these annoying editorial notes. So that's at least somewhat of an improvement. But your underlying point is obviously fundamentally correct. This whole episode has illustrated how much power they have.
Yes.
Has illustrated, look, no one's immune from this. It may benefit your side today, or seem to, although I really don't think that this was good for Democrats if that's the standard that you're going for. This was kind of a disaster all the way around. But ultimately, these organizations have so much power. To treat them with a wave of the hand of like, oh, they're private companies and they can do whatever they want, and First Amendment doesn't apply because they're, private business. And yeah, technically that is absolutely true. But when you see the impact that they have on all of our lives, you can't just wave your hand and be like, this is fine and they can do whatever they want. These are monopolies, and they should be treated as such. They should be treated the same way that we, regulate utilities and think about the impact that that has on our lives. And those are essentially monopolies in a lot of cases too. So I think that this has been a real wake-up call for people who may not have really seen the threat represented by this tech censorship that we've had.
I think you're exactly right.
All right, we're going to have more Rising for you after this.